manager ratings, if you read the research around them, they're 60% bias. 60% of a manager's rating is explained by the idiosyncrasies of the manager.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Break the Wheel podcast. I am here with you with Josh Merrill, who is my co-founder at Confirm. Hello.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So Josh and I have been friends for literally 20 years. We met in undergrad, and we basically share a brain and finish each other's
sentences. Yeah. We've lived in, I think, 4 different places together.
Yeah.
We've been each other's landlords.
Yeah, I've been your landlord. You've been mine.
That's right.
It's hilarious.
Yep.
And now we're doing this business together. So I thought, this is one of the early episodes of the podcast. Might as well have you on at least once. See how it goes. We get a little honest,
because I'm so
messy.
Entertaining.
You are entertaining.
No, not really. I'm not entertaining.
You can be. All right. Well, diving in with our first segment, we're going to uncork and unwind. Today's wine is from Spain. And speaking of Spain, they have a unique approach to employee terminations where severance pay is often mandatory, even in cases of fair dismissal. This practice ensures that employees have a financial cushion during their job transition. And I'm curious, Josh, what do you think about that?
Oh, gosh. So I have some mixed feelings. I think that the idea of having a financial cushion is great. I wonder sometimes whose responsibility it is. The idea of a universal basic income has intrigued me for a long time. I don't know if it's the right thing, but we have this interesting incentive mechanism where if you don't work, you starve. And in the United States in particular, if you don't work and you get sick, you die. There aren't a lot of safety nets there in that respect. So we have very much incentivized work, but I kind of wonder what we're missing out on as a society when people maybe aren't free to explore the things that may not be economically rewarding in the short term, but in the long term could generate a lot of value.
It's very wise. I'm also, hitting close to home when you're talking about things like a universal basic income, even though it's like, I don't want to get political, and yet it's kind of inevitable that some of these things come up when we're talking about the workplace. You and I just today approved our open enrollment, and we saw that there was a 22% increase year over year on the health insurance side for us, which is insane. Yeah. It's not sustainable to do that every year, and yet we have to somehow cover this for folks. And it's no wonder folks are also going abroad more to hire, because oh my gosh, it's getting harder and harder to hire and sustain employees in the US, which is quite a challenge.
And that's one of the ways that a lot of companies are getting around requirements like these is, we still have this huge split between what a contractor is entitled to and what an employee is entitled to. And a lot of companies get around that by hiring contractors, and policies like this that may be really progressive and in favor of the worker all kind of go out the window when people just get converted to contract work.
Totally. And, it's one of those elephants in the room that a lot of us have organizations where, from a legal standpoint, the definition and the difference between an international contractor and an employee is one that you need to be really careful in terms of what you adhere to. And at the same time, people that are working together, regardless of what they're in control of, you want them to be one community, one team, one group that gets along together, that works together. So what a challenge.
By the way, am I supposed to do I need to uncork also?
If you
or
want.
Is that just you?
I mean, I don't mind being the solar drinker, by the way. You can go, yes, uncork,
you will be. Because I don't really drink.
Right.
So
I didn't want to pressure you.
This is what I brought.
You brought
no, I appreciate that. But this is I just brought it. This is a monster.
Yes, monster, which is your version of water.
It's my version. It's my version of coffee for sure.
There you go. That's hilarious.
We can toast to.
Okay, toast to progressive
to HR.
Evolution and having a better world.
Cheers
for HR. Cheers. Ding.
All right.
Oh, I'm spilling on myself. What a mess. Okay, moving on. HR news flash. So a study from FlexJob says that about 73% of Generation Z workers feel more optimistic about their career prospects now than at this time last year. as compared to 43% of millennials and 31% of Gen X, according to a September 25th report. However, workers across all three generations reported similar workplace struggles and challenges, including excessive work and a lack of clarity around their job roles and expectations. Thoughts?
Well, so one thing that's surprising, one thing that isn't. So what is surprising to me is I always kind of expected that like Gen X and millennials would be the more optimistic ones. I thought Gen Z was the one. I thought it was just like getting worse and worse and worse for them. So that surprises me a little bit. I thought that Gen X and millennials would be more optimistic and Gen Z would be less. I'm not surprised that Gen Z or that people across the board are more optimistic today than a year ago. If you think back to where we were coming from, I mean, a year ago, what were we reading about? It was about recession. It was about the layoffs that were starting to happen. And, we just had a jobs report this morning that showed, unprecedented, I think we added 350,000 jobs, something like that, double what economists were predicting. And it seems like maybe this is maybe the soft landing that people are talking about, that maybe the future won't be as bad as we thought it would be this time last year.
It's so interesting because I had like an opposite reaction, which is I'm not surprised that Gen X and millennials are having the reaction they do because, a lot of us can't afford a house, can't afford like anything relative to our parents and our grandparents, and ageism in the workplace is a thing, and like, we're now in our 40s, OMG. And I'm like, oh, we're protected classes now, Josh. We're protected.
I'm perpetually 39. That's
I know.
I love being 40. I love getting older.
Maybe we'll get some wisdom moments for how you keep the youthful glow, which we feel a lot of pressure in our community. Yes,
just moisturize.
Moisturize. There you go. Well, so and speaking of diving into your world, so reality check. Time for a little bit of a guest spotlight. We would love to do a little deep dive, Josh, into your world and your day to day to get a little bit of visibility into your reality. And obviously Confirm does a lot in performance reviews, performance management, and reinventing how they work. So maybe a little bit of a dive into that world of fixing the broken world of performance reviews.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a huge history buff. Every time I learn something new, I have to understand the history of it. And when we started working on performance reviews, I wanted to know, like, where did they come from? How long have we been doing this? And it turns out that manager reviews, that traditional like 1 to 4, 1 to 5 manager rating, is 100 years old. It was literally created by the U.S. military at the end of World War I, and it was brought into the workplace in the 1920s when work was solitary, it was repetitive, we didn't have computers, we didn't even really have telephones. Now, of course, like the way we work today is completely different. You probably are using Slack or Teams, and you can direct message anybody in the organization. We're collaborative, we're cross-functional, we're all over the world. We have like Zoom and WebEx. And so the way that we work has totally transformed. The way we measure that work is kind of frozen in time. And that's really where we turn to organizational network analysis, which is a fancy way of saying you should measure the work the way that you actually do the work, meaning anyone in the organization should be able to review anybody else. It can be positive, it can be critical, but the point is that it matches how we actually get things done. And one of the things I love about our approach, about our product, and the interactions that we get to have with our customers are these magic moments. And one of them happened this week. We were sitting down with the CEO of a 700-person company, and we had just done this performance cycle using ONA, or organizational network analysis, and we put the list of top performers in front of him. And it comes from asking everybody in the organization a question like, who do you go to for help? Who energizes you? Who do you see making a big impact? We put the list of top performers in front of him, and we said, how many of these names do you recognize? And he knew about half of them, I love hearing that, because what it tells me is that half the people who are doing a great job at his company, they're already on his radar. But the other half are these, like what we kind of call it quiet contributors. So they're doing amazing work, but they're just not, they're not managing up. They're not self-promoters. And before organizational network analysis, he would have no idea who those people are. And to be able to put them on his radar was a really special thing for me.
That's
So
awesome.
long-winded answer.
No, I
But
love that. Like, being able to recognize people for the difference that they make at work is such an important thing that often, you know, often it goes unsaid, but for almost all of us, it's like, if our manager doesn't love us, if our manager isn't there promoting us, like vouching for us in those calibration rooms, if our manager isn't like super charismatic and maybe needs to be a native English speaker and be able to like eloquently put together like why you deserve to be promoted, like it's like our ability to be promoted isn't based off of our own performance. It's about our manager's ability to sell us.
yeah, and then we were talking about incentive structures earlier, and the unfortunate incentive structure of how we do work today is that your destiny, your future as an employee, your opportunities for advancement and for growth really depend on your manager's ability to advocate and to influence on your behalf. And that has nothing to do with you. But the incentive that it creates is, in fact, it's so common that we have a word for it, which is managing up. The incentive it creates is for us to manage up and to look good to our managers, at worst, at the expense of how we treat other people. And at best, it's really just a distraction because the work isn't about managing up. The work is about making an impact and making a difference. But we have an incentive structure that doesn't really reward that.
So when we talk about like expanding this incentive structure and having other people's voices be heard, something that comes to mind for me is, this idea of like a popularity contest. Like when you're asking people, who do they go to for help, advice, energy, who do they see as outstanding, who are they concerned about that needs additional support or attention? How do you prevent that from being a popularity contest?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say, well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is the popularity contest is happening today. It's happening with manager ratings. So that's what manager favoritism is. That's what it is to manage up. It's about being popular to an audience of
Of
one.
one, yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, being popular in and of itself is not a bad thing. Like certainly, if somebody were deeply unpopular, you might want to know, well, God, why are they unpopular? Why is this person disliked? But it's not everything, right? I was talking with a professor about this who is one of the leading researchers in employee performance, and we talked about this exact objection, and he said, the way you overcome the popularity contest is through substantiation. You get specific about your questions and you substantiate them. So if I were to ask a question like, who do you go to for help and advice? Another piece of information that you might want to ask is, what did you go to them for help and advice about? And tell me how they were helpful or something like that, right? The more substance you can put behind these answers, the less it becomes about popularity and the more it allows people to focus on, okay, what value did this person actually provide that then makes them valuable to the organization?
So the idea is that if people provide comments justifying why they go to someone for help and advice, why they see them as outstanding, then when the manager reviews this feedback from the network, they can decide for themselves like, oh, this is an outlier, this looks unusual, and they can use that information to make better decisions and better manager ratings.
Totally. I mean, just even on, if you think about like manager visibility, like when I was in college, they taught me to manage by walking
Managing
around, and like
by
nobody
walking
showed me how
around.
to do that over Zoom, right? I just like Slack, like I can't be in every Slack channel. I can't see the DMs. Like DMs are things that used to happen like in the hallway, like in the open. Now that all happens in private. And so as employees, we've become more and more networked and we have more and more touch points. But as managers, we have less visibility than ever. And ONA is one way of giving the manager the visibility back and then allowing them to make better decisions with it.
I love it. Well, clearly, like folks that are in the old world, there's a lot that they're misunderstanding about the people around them. And that gives us a good transition to our next segment, People Misunderstand. So Josh, tell us, what do people misunderstand about you and or your job and or anything in your world?
Oh, okay. So good question. So to answer this question, I have to almost think back to what I thought my job would be before I started doing my job. So in other words, like what did the younger version of myself think about what it meant to be a founder, or think about what it meant to be a CEO before actually doing those jobs? And I think maybe two things come to mind. One is it's really, really hard. Like starting a company is just really, really hard. There was a pretty well documented presentation that Elon Musk gave to,
Sorry,
this was
excuse
all
me.
the way back in like, I know, put aside your feelings about Elon Musk. So going back to like 2000, I think this is 2007, something like that. So he had just taken over as CEO at Tesla, and Tesla hadn't started making cars yet. They were making the two-door Roadster, and they had all these deposit holders who had put down $100,000 to get this car. And the car was late, and it wasn't going to meet any of the specifications that they promised. And he actually called all the reservation holders together into the Palo Alto showroom. And he explained to them that he broke the bad news, that it just wasn't going to be the car that he promised that it would be. And he talked about how hard it was to actually start a company and get it off the ground. And he said it's like eating effing glass, and not just a little bit of glass. And it's really true. I mean, even if you're so lucky to be one of those like 1 out of 10 startups that turns out to be, wildly successful, it is really hard. I mean, I just saw, I think it was earlier this week, that like Smile Direct Club is like on the verge of bankruptcy. This is a company that went public, raised $1.5 billion in the IPO, and they're on the verge of bankruptcy now. And it just kind of goes to show you that like you can go all the way to that moment that, entrepreneurs are supposed to dream about, the IPO, and then still fail afterwards. I mean, it is so hard. And a lot of the time, when we read about success, it's really just that those founders just kept going against impossible odds and just never gave up. I think the second thing that I didn't know before I started doing my job is just how important storytelling is. That as a founder or as a CEO, you really are this kind of professional storyteller. And, you can have the best business model in the world or the greatest product, but at the end of the day, human beings, like we all just want to be told a story. And, it's a skill that they don't teach you in school. I never took a storytelling class in business school, but I wish they had, because it you tell stories all the time to prospects, to customers, to employees, to get them to join this mission that you're on, to investors. You sort of become this professional storyteller, and getting good at that skill, it's so underappreciated. And I didn't know how important it would be until I started doing this job.
It's so interesting because the storytelling out there, sometimes you have that really compelling storyteller that builds this really awesome business based off of it that ends up like solving the problems for their customers, et cetera. And then you have storytellers like, I don't know, Elizabeth Holmes, et cetera. I mean,
Right.
that it's like they're good at telling stories, but I'm not sure it's the outcome that, is the healthiest,
Well, you can be a great person, and you can also be full of shit. Either way, being a good storyteller, it's a universally applicable skill.
Touche. So it sounds like people misunderstand.
Can be used for good or evil. So put it that way.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. Well, chewing glass, I think, is a great analogy. I think that especially right now when a lot of us are, forced to do more with less, I think probably a lot of folks listening are feeling like they're chewing a lot of glass right now. So I guess
not just a little bit of glass.
Yeah, like a whole freaking bottle. I mean, I have one here. It's anyway.
Big, right?
Like when chewing glass, I don't know, be like a goat, like make it delicious. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. This next segment is break the wheel or break a heel. So I'm picking a topic. I'm going to give you 5 items, and you're going to tell me does it break the wheel? innovative, getting out of the cycle of awfulness, or does it break a heel, which we all know if you rock down the runway, how awful that is. So the topic today is apropos to our conversations. It's performance reviews. Number 1, continuous feedback. Break the wheel or break a heel?
So my first reaction is break a leg.
Break a leg.
Because it's a good thing, but you like good luck with it. Okay, so got to my head. Break the wheel. Continuous feedback is a good thing. I think it's also important to understand what it is and what it isn't. It's a great way for people to feel like they matter and for them to develop. It's not a really good way of helping somebody understand where they stand in the organization. It's not a measurement tool. I think the conversation in our industry for the last 10 years has been about how not to do performance reviews, like do continuous feedback instead.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're seeing riffs. We're seeing like belt tightening and the return of the performance review. Because continuous feedback doesn't help managers and leaders make those kinds of decisions that they have to make today around promotions and pips. So I'll say break the wheel, but I really want to say break a leg.
Well, it's interesting because definitely many of us who instituted like continuous feedback platforms, and I know Confirm does continuous feedback, but we expect that it's going to solve some of these problems, and then we see that it skews positive. Like only a subset of our team engages with it. We have a lot of recognition in there, but then when it comes to actually identifying problem areas, it's like really hard to get people to put that kind of information into a system of record. So it's like kind of challenging. So good wisdom.
Totally.
All right, next, manager ratings.
Oh, this is break a heel. Manager ratings, if you read the research around them, they're 60% bias. So 60% of a manager's rating is explained by the idiosyncrasies of the manager. By the way, 20% is noise, and then 20% is actual performance of the employee. So manager ratings don't do the thing that we think that they do, which is to measure performance. They are a great expression of manager bias, and not a lot more than that. So I'm going to say break a heel to manager ratings.
Yeah, it's like, are you an easy rater? Are you a hard rater? More useful to know, like, if you rated everybody on your team a 3 and somebody got a 4, much more useful than you rate everybody on your team a 4 and, somebody got like a 2 or a 1 or, that's.
Totally. And we all have biases as human beings. We all have idiosyncrasies. And when, to assume that any manager is going to check those things at the door when they go to assign a rating, it's just not realistic. We're all still human beings at the end of the day.
Makes sense. All right, this next one. So we've just been talking about organizational network analysis and getting feedback about the organization. So curious what you think about peer 360s.
Peer 360. Okay, so
break the wheel or break a heel.
Break a leg. Yeah, this is a break. This is a break a leg, but I'm gonna skew toward break a heel. Peer 360s, by the way, have a really interesting history. I had to read about this. So 360s, I swear to God, this is 100% real. Created by the first thing that you would ever see in history that resembles a 360 was created by psychologists in the Nazi military in the 1930s.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not even kidding. The thing that they did that was a little different than what you'd recognize today is that the peer feedback actually went to a psychologist who would then like just write it into a report about the subject. But once the typewriter kind of proliferated in the workplace, it became direct feedback, and that was really in the 1950s and 60s. And then by the 80s and 90s, we had this branding of calling it the 360. But that methodology was there for a long time. In general, if you've ever done a 360, I think what you learn about them quickly is they take a lot of time. Most people don't learn a lot from them. They mostly get a lot of positive feedback. I mean, the last 360 that I did, it's been a few years, but I could sum it up. I mean, it probably took, 5 or 6 hours of time for everybody to complete. And I could just sum it up into one sentence, which is just keep doing what you're doing. Um, and I think that's the experience a lot of people have around 360s is the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So I'm going to say break a heel.
People also like they pick the people who they know are going to say good things about them, right? Like you cherry pick like, oh, I'm not working well with that person, I'm not going to pick them, right? Even when you get the manager involved, right? Like sometimes they're picking these people that you know ahead of time, like, okay, this person's going to give, the info that I want them to give.
Well, so if you tie it, if you tie it to performance, and then performance maybe is tied to compensation, like of course the incentive is going to be get people who are going to say good things. At most, I think maybe they're helpful from a developmental perspective, but that has to stay like really far away from performance. Otherwise, you get that incentive.
It's fascinating. So, I mean, I know when people were hearing about organizational network analysis earlier and then hearing this about 360s, like maybe they sounded like the same thing. But the takeaway that I get is peer 360s, you cherry pick the people that are going to say good things about you. And the people that suffer the most are like the high performers that everybody wants to write their review. And then like they end up being the people being like, I hate this process. I can't do my work. Like, end up being resentful.
I have 20 reviews
HR.
to write.
Totally. And then instead, like this O&A thing where you're just asking like, okay, who do you go to for help and advice? Who energizes you work? It's like open-ended, like light lift, totally different experience.
And you're not asking when you do, another key difference is when you do a 360, you may ask a peer to rate you, 1 to 5 scale or something like that. When you do organizational network analysis, there's no rating, right? When I ask you, who do you go to for help and advice? You're not answering the question, how helpful are they? You know who you go to for help. Like that's a very simple question. And, you don't have to agonize between what's a 3 and what's a 4 like you would on a 360.
That's fascinating.
So it's really simple and straightforward. You have the power of sample size where dozens of people can go to the same person for help, and suddenly this person's an expert.
And you know what I love about
you don't get that with 360s.
Totally. What I love about that is that like the advisors, the wise influencers, folks that may tend to skew older or with more tenure in a lot of organizations where like their contribution actually is a lot more about their help to others than necessarily like their individual contributor work. Those are people that like don't get visibility in the traditional model, don't even get visibility in the peer 360 model, because if they're giving help and advice to 50 people around the organization, because we're also networked, but you can only pick like 3 people for your peer 360s, like there's a whole world of information that you just completely miss.
You would miss it. Absolutely.
Fascinating. All right. Next, break the wheel or break the heel. OKRs. Objectives and key results.
Oh, I'm going to say, this is a tough one. I want to say break the wheel. I've heard OKRs to me, they're kind of this like, at least for me personally, they're kind of this like mirage where like I hear about organizations that really depend on them and do them really well. But it's just a rumor. Like it's like the Emerald City. I've never experienced it myself. Like I've never experienced an organization that does, OKRs or goal setting really, really well. I mostly just read about how great other organizations are that do it. That's my experience with them.
That's fair. Well, you're probably not the only person listening here that feels similarly. I will say I've done them in a lot of different organizations, and at Google, I think that actually we did them really well in 2006 when I was there. But I don't know how that is today. But at different startups, like the pace and things change so fast that like by the time you get to the end of the quarter, you look at this list and you're like, we're not doing like half of these things, and yet you're still feeling good about what you're doing. So maybe I guess it's your mileage may vary.
Google's the one company that I hear about that does OKRs really well. Other than Google, I don't hear a lot about how great OKRs are.
Fair enough. All right. Last item, break the wheel or break the heel, organizational network analysis. This is a layup.
Oh yeah, it's not even a break the wheel. This is like a shatter the wheel. Organizational network analysis, it's the future of performance reviews. I think in 5 years, especially if you're in a knowledge organization, it would be weird if you didn't do organizational network analysis.
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more conversation about it, more and more people doing it, and it ties into our tools that we use today, and being hybrid, being remote, all of that. That's awesome. All right. We got a lot of interesting break the wheel, break the heel. Let's move on to the wheel breaker of the week. So this week's wheel breaker is LinkedIn, which is interesting. I don't know if I would have picked them without reading this, but LinkedIn introduced AI-assisted recruiting tools and a coaching chatbot. These new AI-based tools are said to improve efficiency so recruiters can focus on strategy and people-centric work, the company says. Obviously, like, first thing I think about is, what about bias? I'm sure that's what a lot of us are thinking about. What are your thoughts?
It all just kind of, if I can like expand the scope a little bit, like I actually took my first ride in an autonomous taxi last week.
And you're still alive.
It was one of the
Somehow you made it.
I'm still alive. I did. I've done it several times since then, and
wow.
It was actually it was pretty cool. But what it all kind of gets me to is like it feels like we're going into this future where actually talking to another human being is going to become a little bit of a special treat.
Oh, are you for me? It's like it's the opposite. It's like eating asparagus, or I don't know.
It's
okay,
like,
if you like asparagus anyway.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to talk to people.
It's like
go ahead.
It's like machines are great for like, they used to be really good at like the 80% case. And now with AI and, more advanced computing, like those driverless taxis, or whatever, that now it's maybe going up to the 98% or the 99%. And then there's still that 1 or 2% of the time where you just wish you had a human that could get you. My taxi example is like the car wouldn't, even though I was standing on the corner, the car wanted to meet me around the other side of the street, and there was a bunch of traffic, so the car is just creeping along, and like any human driver, like I could just flag them down, and they would stop, and I would get in the car. It was like really hot out too, but the driverless cab won't do that. It has to. You can only get into it at the designated pickup spot, and so, that's not a big deal, but it's one of those like, oh man, 1% of the time, I wish there were a human being who could like color outside the lines with me. And, I kind of, that's kind of how I feel about when I hear about like an AI assisted recruiting tool. It's like, yeah, most of the time it probably will work pretty well. And then there's that like 1 or 2% of the time where you wish, like I said, you wish you could color outside of the lines with another human being.
Totally. Well, I feel the sentiment of like, okay, save me time, but I get super, super nervous about this idea that there's going to be all of this implicit bias that's going to actually cause a whole boatload of people that should be getting recognized, that should be getting through doors into organizations, that actually technology like this could hold them back. And yet at the same time, I imagine that a responsible recruiter that is actually asking the AI, like, please address bias, please think about bias, like he's giving prompts that actually mention bias, could actually have the opposite effect and actually maybe surface and identify the bias that's there to highlight candidates that otherwise wouldn't go recognized. So it's very much like the eye of the beholder, the eye of the person who's running the show. Interesting thing you were talking about, the cars. I know for a fact from other people I know who've been in them that like none of them do the California rolling stop, right? They come to a complete stop at like every stop light or stop sign. And like that can't be more unhuman. Like I don't know a single human being that like, that does like 100% stop. I'm like, so.
No. Well, actually Tesla released a statistic that it's not 99.95 or 99.5% of drivers do rolling stops.
There you go. So maybe the more human thing to do is to actually break the rules sometimes. Maybe a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Speaking of break the rules, I don't know if you have any break the rule wisdom, but wisdom on the rocks is this next segment. So you're going to just impart for us any interesting wisdom that maybe that a lot of people don't, that you would like to share.
Oh, this is a tough one. Okay, so I'm going to go, since I can only pick one thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to something that I've been thinking about. So somebody recently told me about these ephemeral tattoos.
Oh no, Josh.
These are tattoos that last.
No.
Okay, go ahead. Listen. So here's the thing. I don't have any tattoos. I've never gotten one. I've never gotten a tattoo because I've never thought of anything that I would want to just have permanently, like, on my body. I'm going to see it every day and other people could see it or whatever. But
And then you can't, by the way, you
I
can't be
heard
buried
about.
in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo. Just so you know, not a lot of people know
Oh,
that.
I didn't know that.
Just letting you know.
I hadn't planned.
Uh-huh.
But they have these ephemeral tattoos that last like 2 or 3 years, and that really got me thinking. Like, well, gosh, I can try it out. What would I choose? What would I put on my body? And like in it, and I think if I had to pick one, just something to remember every single day is this quote that I heard a couple years ago. It's my favorite quote now, and the quote is, "Whatever you're doing right now, you're getting better at it." And it's a reminder, and there's something actually like very true about that, because you know we have we talk about the plasticity of the brain, where our brain is really well adapted to get more efficient at the things that we do repeatedly. Um, and that's why, people say like practice, got the piano in the background, practice makes perfect. It's because the more you practice something, anything, right, the deeper those channels get and the more efficient those channels get, and the easier it is for your brain to work along that pathway. And so there's some real truth to that whatever you're doing right now, you're getting better at it, whether it's something that you're doing at work, a conversation you're having, a way of thinking, an internal dialogue, like whatever it is that's going on right now, whether it's in here or out there, you are getting better at it. And I have to think, like, if there's any one thing I want to remind myself every day, it's to be mindful of the things that I'm doing right now that, oftentimes are subconscious, or, we're just not really thinking about them or not questioning them, but to bring some attention to them and remember that whatever it is, I'm getting better at it.
That's wild. I mean, whether it be a healthy thing or an unhealthy thing, this adage applies. So great wisdom.
You're getting better at it.
Right?
Yeah.
Getting better at it. Well, I will say, as an aside, I did hear about a startup not too long ago that was doing ephemeral tattoos that like is going belly up. So because they weren't like coming off fast enough.
They weren't ephemeral. Yeah. The tattoos weren't ephemeral. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a problem.
So be careful. If you're going to do it, be careful. All right.
I don't have the tattoo. I never got the tattoo.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Well, speaking of silly, crazy things, this next segment is What Should I Have Done? It is a segment where I tell you a personal story of something that I did at work that is a little bit ridiculous, and you tell me what I should have done. So today, I'm going to share a story of my first year. It was at Google, 2006. There were 3,000 people in the company at the time. I was like an early associate product manager on Gmail, and it was an exciting time, but also a time where, I just got out of like college and school. I had an upbringing with like a really, really strict, full-blooded German stepmom who was never happy enough with what I did. And so I had a huge inferiority complex, huge imposter syndrome complex, and I never felt good enough. And I felt like my ability to make a difference in this world was based off of what I could produce as a human being, that my deservedness of love was what I could produce, which 20 years of therapy later, I don't feel that way. But at the time I did. So I got pneumonia.
Yes, pneumonia.
One week, I started coughing, started getting sicker and sicker, and I went to the doctor. The doctor said, "You have pneumonia." And so I was like sitting up, and at night, I just coughed. It was horrible. But I felt like I was making a difference at work. I felt like actually that I was engaged at work, that I enjoyed my work. And so, and I had some really important stuff that I wanted to do. And so I got a mask in 2006 when masks were not a thing. I got a mask and I wore it and I walked into work to do my work. And just so happened that that was the day when one of the founders of Google, Sergey, was doing his management by walking around and was walking by because he had some questions about Gmail. And I was there and he like looked and he said, "Why are you wearing a mask?" And I said, "Because I have pneumonia." And he went, "Oh my God." And he jumped back about 3 feet and then said, "You should go home," and then continued on his way. And then after that, I think I was depressed for like 10 years. No. So Josh, tell me, what should I have done?
Oh gosh. Well, what you should have done is exactly what you did. So don't worry.
Go to work?
I think that, well, you just can't change the past. But
Oh, wait.
I will say
Okay.
that,
Go ahead.
okay, if you got pneumonia today,
Yeah.
so here's the difference. The answer today is different from the answer in 2006. And the difference was COVID. There was a time in the past when, going into work sick made you look, it was tough. It was brave. You're toughing it out and still working
so horrible,
through.
But it's true.
Yeah, and
my best employee.
right, and it's a totally kind of, it's a self-centered, meaning it is centered on the individual. There's no thought of like, well, oh, you could get a lot of other people sick too. And I think that is what changed after COVID. Now it's like, and I think that was really because of so many of the testing requirements, where like if gosh, I remember flying to Paris during the pandemic at one point, and like they'd get tested to be able to actually like leave the airport or something like that. And there's, by the way, no other disease that we actually do that with. We don't test for the flu or for cold or anything else. But just that expectation that in order to be out in society, you can't be sick, really changed the way people treat being sick at work. And it's not acceptable anymore, which I think is a really good thing.
That's fair. Yeah. In retrospect, I think this was like a crazy one. So thank you for your words of wisdom, which brings us to the horror story of the week. If you want to share, Josh, a real life HR or otherwise horror story, and what went down.
Oh gosh. Oh, I mean, there are just so many. We all have them. I can think of a couple that are, kind of non-specific, but, I remember one case where an employee was relocated to another office and then laid off the next week.
Oh!
It was interesting. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, certainly many around performance reviews. Certainly I've seen many people like passed over for promotions or told that they were meeting expectations when they were really outstanding and everybody knew it.
I'm like, stop, Josh. We only need one horror story. You're getting me depressed.
There's so many. I'll just leave it there. Leave it there. There's a lot.
Point taken. Well, I could just say like messed up performance review feedback and performance reviews and mismanaged performance reviews. I'd say that horror story is happening every second of every day at every single company around the world. So OMG, that's a wobbly wheel.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the wobbly wheel of the week. So Tyson Hormel, they face a class action suit over worker compensation. So executives allegedly held secret meetings and off-the-books dinners to discuss worker pay rates, supporting a plausible inference of a conspiracy to suppress wages. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I don't think this should be a surprise. We have a strike going on with healthcare workers at Kaiser Permanente. SAG-AFTRA is still on strike. The writers' strike just concluded after 5 months, I think.
Yeah, a long time.
UAW is on strike right now. So I don't think this is surprising in the least.
Wow.
In fact, if anything, it fits a pattern.
That's sad. I would love to live in a world where I'm like, is it capitalism? Is it? I don't know. But I would love to live in a world where we're all incentivized to like, still like whatever, make money, but like treat people well. And I don't know. Yeah. What a mess.
I can tell you, I love capitalism. But I do. I love I'm a capitalist. I love capitalism. And I'll also say that
please keep listening.
Good.
Please keep listening. Sorry, no, go ahead. Keep
going.
But
it's only as good as the incentives
right.
that are set up to support it. And if those incentives are misaligned, like the one that we talked about with manager ratings and a totally manager-driven system of performance and advancement, yeah, if those incentives are misaligned, you're going to get some bad outcomes.
It's true.
That's just how it works.
If you have a country, an organization, what have you, that has a certain policy, it's the people who are running the show that can make that policy have effective outcomes or ineffective outcomes. It's fair. So noted, which brings
Totally.
us to water cooler whispers. So any word on the street, rumor mill, anything that comes to your mind that maybe our audience would like to know about that they otherwise wouldn't have heard? What's your water cooler whisper?
Oh gosh. What is my water cooler whisper? I will say that so there's a lot of buzz around artificial intelligence, around AI, especially generative AI. Um, the water cooler and a lot of companies getting funded doing AI. I think if there's a water cooler whisper, I think it would have to be that um, venture capitalists they know it's a bubble. Like they know
Uh,
there's a bubble
yeah,
happening.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of an open secret now, even amongst the people who are funding these companies.
You just got to be hoping that you're on the right side of the bubble, right? Like the very, very small percentage of companies that are going to survive it and not part of the very large percentage of companies that are going to. Fair enough.
Totally. Yeah,
All
totally.
right. Next segment, HR Speak Funny. So we pick a weird or unusual or just like typical phrase that we just use and we don't really think much about and make fun of it a little bit. So today's HR Speak Funny is the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle is a concept in management developed by Lawrence J. Peter, which observes that people in a hierarchy tend to rise to a level of respective incompetence. Employees are promoted based on their success in previous jobs, right? Until they reach a level at which they are no longer competent, right. Which maybe that is true sometimes, as skills in one job do not necessarily translate to another. The Peter Principle, is that a thing?
Now I've got to go read all about it. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's probably some truth to it. When it breaks down, it tends to break down seems to really break down in a very spectacular way. When you do read sometimes about, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, places that you think would really have their act together, promoting people into positions of total incompetence. And then there are some times where it doesn't always work out that way. And sometimes really competent people get in those jobs and do great. But now I'm going to go read about it.
Yeah, I definitely know there are a lot of people who every single boss that they've had was another Peter who was promoted to incompetence. So if that's you
Absolutely.
and you've gone through that, we hear you, we feel you, we support you finding a better job. Or but just a better manager, get organizational network analysis maybe as a way to help make that problem better. All right. Last segment here, decline to comment. I'm going to ask you 3 questions in order, and you can decline to comment to exactly one of them. So leading in with the first one, what was your hardest work moment to date?
Do I get to hear all 3 before I...
No. You can either decline to comment or share. So, yeah.
Okay. My hardest work moment to date was probably being fired. Most of us at some point in our careers are going to have the experience of being fired. And I think that at the time it meant a lot more than it did with a little perspective. The moment it hurts, it feels terrible. You feel rejected, loss of income. I think with a little bit of perspective, I can look back on it and go, that was a necessary part of my path. And it is one of those inflection points where life changes in a really big way and the opportunity for it to change for the better.
One door closes and then another door opens and then...
Totally.
Life. Oh. All right. Number 2, which co-founder or coworker did you least enjoy working with?
Do I have to name a name?
Yeah. or you can decline to comment.
Okay.
But then you have to answer the last one.
Okay, I'll give you maybe like a half answer to this one because I won't name the name.
There are
But
no
I'll
half
just tell
answers
you.
on this show, Josh Merrill.
Okay, then
But go ahead.
I will answer the third one, whatever it is. But
Okay.
I won't name this person's name, but I will just say generally, people who manage the worst coworkers I ever have to work with are the people who manage up at the expense of working well with others. The boss loves them. They stay in their job year after year, and everyone around them is miserable.
The golden child, maybe the golden boy or the golden gentleman. Yeah. Or,
Totally.
or you know, other people too, but that's anyway. Noted.
Totally.
All right. Number 3. Who, this is juicy. Who do you roll your eyes at when you see them on LinkedIn?
Who I don't know that I have a single person in mind, but I can say broadly what I roll my eyes at on LinkedIn are there's this LinkedIn post like template now where like it's one sentence followed by a paragraph space followed by another sentence, and they're trying to tell this story, and it's what you kind of learn after seeing enough of those done badly is it's not really about where you putting one sentence in at a time in the line break. It's not really about the format. It's about the content, because more often than not, what I see are those types of stories that end pointlessly with no substance at all. And that's what I roll my eyes at on LinkedIn. Like, it's not about, it's not about, it honestly reminds me of like, I'll quote another one of your favorite people, Ronald Reagan, who, his nickname in the 80s was the great communicator. And, and he said, I'm not a great communicator. I just communicate great things. And all that to say is like, the content actually really matters. It's not just the form of it.
It's true though. Like those, that LinkedIn format, I feel like their algorithm one day was like, what if we just had the algorithm boost people who have like the shortest number of paragraphs in terms of words, and like do it like the more of them that they have, like let's just boost up to the top of our feed. And then suddenly like all of LinkedIn starts looking like this, like, those infomercials in like the 90s, late at night. Like,
it's like watching a station of ShamWows or whatever. You know what I mean?
It's a chamois. You're going to love my nuts. Yeah. Okay. If you don't get that reference, just anyway.
Yeah. No, it's true. But it's true. And I don't know how that became like the dominant post. I guess I get it. Like it is it's succinct, it's direct. And that works well for LinkedIn. It works for busy people. But if the substance isn't there, it just feels like a joke.
So true. I feel like the algorithm maybe is starting to get better, but it's true that it's been a journey. Well, with that, Joshua Merrill, it has been lovely to I don't know what the word is.
Cheers.
To mingle. To mingle. Yeah. Lovely to mingle. So cheers to change. So we'd like to celebrate ending with companies like Thoropass, who recently shared that they retained 100% of their top performers by using the power of organizational network analysis, coming up multiple times today, to identify outstanding performers that weren't visible to managers directly, but who the network went to for help, advice, energy, and notice their outstanding contributions. So we applaud organizations like Thoropass that are looking beyond the manager's perspective to gain insight into their talent. And we believe in a future where all people are rightly recognized for the difference they make at work. So with that, Josh, cheers. Have a lovely weekend, etc. And thank you all for listening. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me.